Welcome to Inaudible. My name is Jeremy Weiland, and I'm joined by my co-host, Ryan Masterson. On this podcast, we discuss the weird, beautiful, channeled messages found in the archives of LL Research, an organization dedicated to sharing spiritual information with the world. You can find out more about LL Research at llresearch.org. The archives contain transcripts of messages from allegedly discarnate sources who claim to hail from an organization they call the Confederation of Planets in service to the Infinite Creator. If you would like an audio version of the transcripts, please subscribe to Ryan's other podcast, Living, Love, and Light, available on all platforms. Ryan and I will try to provide analysis and commentary on the philosophy described in these messages, identifying the common themes, and grappling with the application of this information to our human lives. Thanks for joining us on this journey. How's it going, Ryan?
I'm doing very well, Jeremy. How are you?
I'm doing pretty good. Doing pretty well.
Happy 4th of July weekend.
Yes, happy 4th.
You've got a barbecue coming up, yeah?
Yeah, kind of like a potluck barbecue.
Oh.
We don't, well, you don't want, this is kind of like America's back to normal party, it seems like. Mm-hmm. But not everybody feels like that. So,
sure.
If you want to bring your own hot dogs and grill them, that's fine,
Sure. Yeah, I mean.
But we're going to be cooking hot dogs for everyone and potato salad and all that stuff.
That's too bad, Jeremy. Hot dogs are terrible.
What do you eat in the summer then? Tempeh, tofu.
Yes, vegan tofu with green bean salad. No, I'm kidding. No, for some reason I can't do hot dogs. If I ever do hot dogs, they have to be drenched in condiments and onions and I'll do anything that hides the flavor of hot dog. It's just something about it. They don't sit well with me. So burgers or, some sausage, some kind of sausage,
I was going to say, it really makes me want to try this sausage maker that you spoke about visiting with your son in episode 1, because it must be some banging sausage.
It's ridiculous. They have these sausages that have, cheddar cheese inside of them. They're next level. I'm sure if I made it I should probably watch out. My cholesterol and it's probably not going to do well if I keep it up with all that saturated fat. But no, actually, I judge the quality of a sausage based on whether or not I can have more than one. Because if it's too fatty or if there's too much salt or whatever, my body will start rejecting. I'll put it in my mouth to eat it and I'll have to spit it out because I'm going to get gag or something. So, but good sausage that's well made, that's, got relatively low fat, relatively speaking, I can eat a ton of those. So,
This is why one of the reasons I love going to Germany as often as I used to, at least with my wife, because, the food is so tremendous, and especially finding that right balance between, the fattiness and just the other aspects of it. Yeah, that's getting that right is key.
I've only had authentic German food once, and because there is a German restaurant, a legit German restaurant in San Francisco, and I can't remember the name of it, but it was very cool. It was very cool. I'm not sure how to relate my experience other than it was very cool, but it was not what I expected.
It kind of is sort of like home cooking to a certain extent, but it's got a little bit of an elevated flair sometimes. They just take food really seriously there, like the French, just a different kind of serious.
Sure. Yeah, I'm a sucker for good food. Doesn't matter where it's from. I'm a super fan of anything that's around the equator. Any food that's from the equatorial region, whether it be the South Asia or Latin America, whatever. It's just, for whatever reason, I like food that's like around that area.
Do you mess with any African food, like Ghanaian, West African, Ethiopian, anything like that?
I think I've had Ethiopian once, and it was so long ago. I remember having it, but I don't remember what we had. I've had, like Moroccan food,
tangines and stuff like that. Yeah.
Yeah, but it's rare that it's rare that I eat that. Most of the time it's like, I don't know, Thai, Thai, Vietnamese, or Mexican. Going down to Ecuador and eating Ecuadorian food was pretty cool. That was very, very tasty. So, yeah. Anyway.
And you got to eat all this food because at a certain point in your evolutionary process, it will, if it's really tasty food that we all like, then it will probably at some point in our bodies create suffering, right?
Yes.
And wouldn't you know it?
As they say, it kind of hurts on the way out more than it does on the way in when you're eating that spicy food. But
worst transition ever that I just forced down the listener's throat.
Yes, that is what we want to discuss today. Suffering. There have been a couple transcripts within the last, in the 80s, between May and August, that at least note suffering. There was one, I went all the way back to 1976. There was a group member whose mother was suffering particularly, well isn't the right word, but suffering. It was clearly this group member, S, was being affected. And Haton actually addresses this woman's suffering in like a special session after the meditation. But the idea of suffering, and what's on my mind, is my consistent running into other people who view suffering as relative or hierarchical, like my suffering is worse than yours. Or, if I only had this, I would have it easy, or my life would be so much better. Or I wish, that person's got it easy. They don't know what it's like to have X and Y. That is on my mind. And, I'd like to just kind of run through some of these transcripts and get your thoughts on that.
Perfect.
Yeah. The first transcript is, a recent publication in the Living, Love, and Light podcast. It's Carla channeling Latwii. It's from August 3rd, 1980. And a questioner asks, as there is so much suffering in this world, I would like to know if many entities incarnating on this planet were in need of the suffering. And Latwii responds, that is correct, my brother. Many people, as you call them, choose situations which seem to be of some degree of suffering. This is because they will learn what they need to learn, not in this illusion which is evanescent, but in a higher understanding which is not so short-lived. They choose these situations for the learning. However, during the process of incarnation, the Oversoul blankets itself, as does a man in a shroud, hiding in the shadows, so that the individual does not remember why he desired the lessons that he is now attempting to learn. Therefore, the challenge is to understand the lesson and to learn the lesson that is presented by the situation in which you find yourself. The lesson is always one away from separation and towards love, away from attachment and towards love, away from what you call love and towards the burning desire and joy that is truly love. Let's pause there. There's 2 more paragraphs, but already an interesting idea that the suffering we experience pertains to lessons that we need to learn, lessons that we signed up for before we get here. I think we've covered that idea before, but Jeremy, what's your immediate thoughts on this?
I really like that recent reading that you did. I really like that whole session. Especially the imagery of blanketing, the Oversoul blanketing the self. Like I really felt like that captures what the veil feels like in terms of that disconnection that is so pregnant with possibility for growth and transformation. But yeah, I think that what you just talked about speaks largely for itself. The problem that people have is that doesn't seem in some sense that doesn't seem right. On the one hand, we're told that this is a infinitely loving creation and creator. So why would the creator put us in this situation? And of course, the answer is to do this shell game that the Confederation often plays with us of like, well, it wasn't the creator that chose this. It was you. And those two entities are really not different things anyway. So,
yeah,
it just kind of like tries to, in a lot of ways, redirect the heartfelt energy of that question, because people ask that question about suffering very earnestly, very sincerely, and in desperation a lot of the times. In fact, I think the Ello Research Transcript Library has several instances of people reaching out to the Confederation in desperation. So there's really good information in here, and it's what I'm hoping we can do is have a survey of all these different angles that Confederation entities have taken on this question, because all of those angles give us a little clue into this thing that ultimately we're not going to figure out intellectually, which is the utility of suffering.
Yeah, agreed. The next paragraph, Latwii continues, "You have a birthright of freedom. There is no situation, no matter how ghastly to the senses of your physical eyes and ears, that is not rich in possibility to the immortal soul. Suffering is but for the moment and is full of purpose. There are those who do not need to learn the lessons involved with suffering." Well, hold on. Let's pause here. Let's pause because that last sentence. Suffering is but for the moment and is full of purpose. And for those people who ever played sports growing up, a common inspirational quote that would be put on whiteboards is, "Pain is temporary, glory is forever." Therefore, win the game, Suffering is but for the moment, and it is full of purpose. There is a gym, a health facility, fitness facility out, I think it's in Utah, called Jim Jones. And this place, Jim Jones, did all the training for the actors in the movie 300. And if you know how fit a lot of those guys were, despite them airbrushing abs on some of them, they have a very legitimate fitness regime. But one thing the founder notes that I love, he says, "Suffering provides the opportunity to exercise grit." And I love it. I love that. It just humanizes us a little bit. And whenever you're suffering, you get physically, he's talking about physically, but whenever you suffer physically, by choice, you get the opportunity to exercise that grit within yourself, to, bite down, keep pushing, work through it, because it is going to be temporary. Anyway, those are a few things that come to mind. Jeremy?
Yeah, and I would just say that it's what's very useful is to look at the gifts that suffering conveys. Because I think, as we'll find out through future reading, it's not the suffering per se that is valuable. Mm-hmm. It is what we learn about ourselves that may or may not include the instrument of suffering.
Mm-hmm.
But
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to take away from where you're going with this excerpt.
No, I think that's where I'm headed. But let's see. Let's see. So this does continue. There are those who do not need to learn lessons involved with suffering. They instead need to learn to conquer idleness, wealthiness, or some other desire which in the past has karmically led them to working out on this plane the desires that have held them back and kept them from being free. And I want to pause there yet again, because as I was talking with my brother, my clone, I guess he and I don't necessarily feel like we suffer. It takes quite a bit to get to us. But this idea that we have other things that we need to conquer. And in here, Latwii gives as examples idleness, wealthiness, or some other desire which in the past has karmically led them to working out on this plane the desires that have held them back and kept them from being free. So if we're thinking big picture here, what are the challenges you're dealing with? Is it emotional pain? Is it insecurity? Is it something like you've got, dare I say this, you have too much money? There are problems everyone deals with, and each has their own lessons to learn in their own spiritual journey. And I want to tell you a quick story. And I think I may have brought up this story before. It's a story I tell somewhat often to people I know. I used to teach at a school that was not very well off. It was of a lower socioeconomic status. And, I ran the percussion program. And the kids were kids. Okay? You had your good kids, your quote unquote bad kids, your troubled kids, the kids that didn't like following directions, or the kids who had issues at home, with absent fathers, emotionally absent fathers, or abusive, emotionally abusive mothers, whatever it was. You had that standard group of kids. The next year I worked at a much more affluent school, much more affluent, like night and day. And the funny thing is, we had the same problems in that school. Whereas a kid in the quote unquote poor school might have had a drug problem, being on pot, in the wealthy school, the problem drug was cocaine. It was just a more expensive drug, but the problems were the same. And so, running into this just makes me think everyone suffers. Everyone has their own things that they're dealing with. And it's easy to take a look at someone else and think that they've got it easy, and again, in my industry, a particularly common one is, if I had more money, we work with people's financial goals, and it's like, hey, you need to save and save and invest and do this so that in 20, 30 years, you can throw in the towel with work. You don't have to work anymore. But, still so many people want to get rich quick, so to speak. And because they see other people with a lot of money and just assume that they're not going through the same problems that they're going through with less money. And while that might be true, they're not going through the same problems, but that doesn't mean they're not going through problems. It's just a different set of problems. And anyway, I'm digressing a little bit, but I love this idea that some people don't need to learn the lessons of suffering, maybe physical suffering, but there is a sort of emotional suffering or mental suffering, something that goes on in every person's life that they have chosen for themselves, that they need to learn, lessons that they need to learn. So it's an interesting idea to stew on.
Well, the other interesting thing is, we talk about the proximate conditions of this suffering, right? Socioeconomic status, resources, other conditions of life that we recognize are part of a plan that was put in place by the entity themselves. And it's interesting to see how those conditions can obtain in other people's lives and not cause suffering. In other words, it isn't a one-to-one between the stimulus and the response, right? There are different responses from different entities. And the question is, why?
This is a huge point, Jeremy. I wish we didn't just have a little hammer to nail this. We need like a sledgehammer, like a cartoon sledgehammer to hammer this home. Because I think this point is so key. The challenges I run into, if you were to run into those same challenges, literally the same, whatever it is, your reaction is going to be different. The suffering is not external, right? I mean, by definition, it's something that we deal with. It is internal. And I think this is something Latwii or Hatan actually brings up. Actually, in the next transcript, we're going to get into this kind of idea, but the suffering is personalized and it's internal. And I think that's a huge point.
Yeah, we're not going to get away from the idea that it is, at least in part, perspective, viewpoint that makes an experience suffering.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Latwii continues. Therefore, you may see many things as forms of suffering that are not understood in your world as suffering. And you may see many things that seem to be filled with suffering that in truth are being used to learn precious lessons that will aid the traveler a bit more along what is truly a straightened path, narrow and rocky, but full, nevertheless, of the joy of learning and of sharing. We understand, my brother, your compassion for those who suffer. Suffer then also. Let them fully into your heart and feel what they feel. That is what the teacher known as Jesus did. It was a simple act, but it seems to mean a great deal to your peoples. He could not take the suffering away. He could share it, and one look at those sad eyes would help many to understand why those who knew this teacher were so devoted to him.
When I heard that a few days ago on the podcast, that really just broke me down, because it shows you what really in stark relief what love is. Love isn't just about joy and forgiveness and all of this active stuff that we can do as agents to put energy out there. Sometimes we are the terminus point, and our best service is to be able to simply witness the suffering of others and to make them not feel alone. Sometimes the best that we can do for suffering in others, since it is, largely their perspective that creates it, and they've come by that perspective, honestly. They've come by it through pre-incarnative planning and choices they've made in their lives. It is not our place to judge that perspective. It's not our place to judge that pre-incarnative planning, for goodness sakes. Mm-hmm. So what can we do? We can make it at least matter. We can at least be there to witness it and to open our hearts up completely to it. Perhaps in some cases, if we can approach the example of the master, we can demonstrate an equanimity and an ability to abide suffering that can show what it's really about. That it's not about, well, you didn't figure it out. Like, you just need to think differently, you need to do this different in your life. No, once you take it into your heart, ground it, really balance it, and see the 360 degrees of it, then you offer to the Creator the real yield of it, the real lesson, the real thing that only you can find in it, because only you has that unique perspective on it. Mm-hmm. And that's, we are told, that is extremely valuable to the Creator.
Yeah, I love this last bit here. Suffer then also. Let them fully into your heart and feel what they feel. I mean, this is service, right? If you're wondering, how do you help those that suffer? You could help alleviate their suffering. But how do you help alleviate their suffering if their suffering is internal? Okay, if someone, for example, doesn't have enough money, that's not the example I want to use.
Well, it kind of reminded me of what you were talking about last week, of people who serve not to truly assist the other, but
to make themselves feel sure.
Yeah.
Sure.
You know, we've all, maybe I'm going off the deep end here, but I think most people have had an experience where they've helped somebody largely to get them off their back.
Oh, sure.
You know what I mean? You don't want to deal with what the creator is showing you, what that mirror is showing you about yourself. You too could be as vulnerable, as desperate, as needy.
Yeah.
And the apprehension of that truth is disturbing. The more that we think our station in life is due to our own choices and our own virtue, let's say, the more we are disturbed by the fact that other people don't live lives that to us exhibit that discipline that we believe that we've imposed upon ourselves, because we think that, you know, if you're suffering on some level, right? Don't we sometimes think that it must be because of something you did?
Yeah.
We can tend to think that.
No, you're right.
We tend to we justify to ourselves, right?
Yes.
That allows us to take responsibility off of ourselves for doing what the master demonstrated, right? Which is, I'm going to take on the suffering of you no matter why it's there.
Yes. Yeah. I think what I'm trying to get at and failing miserably is the fact that because that suffering is internal for the person who is suffering, what is the best way to serve a person who is suffering? You know, there are these quick fixes that, you know, help them feel better in the moment, but that may not help the long-term lesson that they are trying to learn. And I think Latwii kind of shows it here. How is it that we can serve? Well, suffer then also. Let them fully into your heart and feel what they feel. I have another story. It's a complete failure of me to serve when someone was suffering and they explicitly asked for me to let them in. It was a guy named Troy. I was a senior in high school. I think Troy was a sophomore or a junior. Troy, I thought, was a super nice guy, but had trouble at home. I don't know the details. I just know he had trouble at home. And one day during PE class, he and I were having a good time playing basketball or whatever. And he asked me if he could give me a call because he really just needed someone to talk to every now and then because things were getting crazy at home. And I'm like, yeah, totally, dude. Well, he called me that night. But when my mom said, hey, Ryan, Troy's on the phone, I froze. I'm like, oh no. What do I do? What do I say? And I said, Mom, tell him I'm not home, you know, or tell him I'm not here right now. I felt bad almost immediately, more out of shame because I didn't know how to react. And plus I told this guy, yeah, dude, give me a call, you know, and I wasn't there for him. Well, I think not too long after, maybe within a week, he had gotten, can't remember if he got expelled or if he got suspended from school for a while. The guy ended up bringing a knife to school, and which was way out of character for the guy, you know. So, but anyway, that was, I think, a great example. I still think about where sometimes the best way to serve is just to listen and to be there and to connect with someone, to try to understand their suffering.
And this is why it's so important to engage in the disciplines of personality if we seek to serve others, because to the extent that we can work through our shadow side, work through our distortions, our blockages, when others bring their distortions, blockages, suffering to us, it will not simply reflect back in our face what we fear in ourselves, because we faced what we fear in ourselves, so that then we can be there for them and not simply be dealing with our reflection in our unwanted reflection in them, right? We can see the total reflection of ourselves in them. And then we're better able, because we don't have the anxiety, we don't have the rejection, we're better able to reach in and perhaps spontaneously, as a matter of our connection to Creator, to the extent that we've cultivated that, offer in the moment what spontaneously is useful. I come back and back again to this idea that we have to do our homework to serve. We cannot just go out and serve. We have to prepare ourselves so that we can serve as best as possible. We can all go out there and try, and we'll do good jobs and we'll do bad jobs. We'll bounce all over the place. But in order for you, but it's not about whether you are giving people what they need. The point is, are you in touch with the Creator? Are you in touch with your deeper self? Because that is a much more reliable indicator of what's necessary. It doesn't require you to be smart and figure out the situation, to have some psychological breakdown of it. It's just a matter of opening yourself up and being a channel.
Yeah. I still love the concept that you planted in my brain. The fact that service is just a form of channeling, of just tuning yourself, meditating, but tuning yourself and then letting basically the Creator flow through you. Maybe in the same way you let Hatan's thoughts flow through your mind and it just comes out your mouth. That service is something quite similar. You kind of come in as an empty vessel, non-judgmental, loving, open, and you let that other person pour a part of themselves into you to share the burden, to share the suffering, and for just a quick moment, connect with someone on a meaningful level. And I just think those connections, I just had a thought. We come into this illusion with the veil, that thick shroud covered over us, covered over our oversoul, forgetting that we're all one, that we are all connected. When we have these moments of connection with each other, those are powerful moments. There's a reason why guys in the military can go through, think of guys going to be Navy SEALs, and they go through their initial Hell Week, as a part of the SEAL training. Those dudes that make it through become bros, and if they get through the entire training, which from what I hear, Hell Week gets the most press, but it is not the hardest part of SEAL training. There's a reason why that suffering ties those men together, because they're connecting. They have all of these deep connections that are through shared suffering. And we don't have to go through Hell Week to connect with others, but it provides a great lesson that there is connection in suffering. It's suffering together. And if you can't suffer together because you're not going through the same experience, well, you can at least share in someone else's pain for a little while, and that will build a connection. And I think it is those connections that are so powerful when we feel that we're tied to others. And just a great way to make that tie is to just open yourself up.
Absolutely. Suffering in a lot of ways breaks us down. It breaks us open. It wears away the things that we think we show to the world as ourselves, and makes us in a lot of ways vulnerable if we embrace it fully. And that to a lot of people seems like a problem. It seems like it's making you weak, and it's making you a target and somebody who can be dumped upon. But actually, what both the Master Jesus and the Confederation say is that it actually makes you strong, and that it is those people who are building the real ability to work with the energy that fourth density is going to bring about. They are going to the meek are going to inherit the earth because the meek are going to be left in fourth density. They will be able to graduate because they recognize that we all go through these hard times, and to the extent that we cannot be alone doing it, it's a little bit more bearable. It feels a little bit less wrong that we're suffering. Like there's a problem with us. And it feels a little bit more like, no, this is a human thing. And I know that because my brother or sister is able to look at it without blinking. They're able to look at what's going on with me and they're not thinking it's wrong.
Yeah.
Why should I think it's wrong? That's how you can really help people with suffering. And then not only do you make it easier on the person, but maybe, just maybe, you can plant the seed that there is some utility and usefulness to this suffering. It doesn't have to be for naught. It doesn't have to be a waste, right? It can be the moment of transformation.
Yes. I like that idea that two people can be going through the same scenario, and one person who is suffering greatly can look at another and think, what? Why aren't they suffering? There's a smile on their face. You know, you can look at other people who are going through the same things you're going through, who are interpreting their experience much different than you. And hopefully one is not too cynical to go, oh my gosh, that person's crazy, or hello, do they not see the BS that they're in? Hopefully one would think, what is it they know that I need to learn, or that I can learn so that I don't have to feel this way? Because I think you've put this multiple times, and I'm still trying to frame it in my own words, but that feeling of wrongness or pain, suffering, hurt, it's a signal. It means that there's something you might want to lean into. There's a good lesson there that you can learn. And if you can learn it, you can come out the other end a more advanced soul. You know, I think the way that you put it is that hurt doesn't mean wrong.
Right.
Can you expound on your idea of when you're feeling hurt, you're feeling pain, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're wrong. Is that you're wrong or that it's wrong?
Either. Right? Like, it is the need that we have as animal spirits, as entities that have an animal body with an evolutionary background, and spirits attempting to manifest within this material reality. So we're the kind of this hybrid in third density, according to the Confederation. And it's this idea that I talked about this last week. I think that I believe that we have developed morality in part as an intellectualization of what otherwise would have been kind of like rules of thumb for survival, right? You know, don't drink the yellow water, you know, like, don't do this, don't do that, you know, don't leave your cousin alone, right? These kinds of like basic things that have a purpose, biologically become precepts morally, and with good reason, right? But at a certain point, we start to make a one-to-one identification between, well, if we're happy, then we're doing it right. If we're not happy, we're doing it wrong. It's very, very simple and straightforward and easy to conceptualize. It's a rule that you can apply to yourself, and you can apply to other people. And from the point of view of limited third density, it makes perfect sense, right? Don't commercials, doesn't business, doesn't everybody in our lives tell us that the point is to be happy? Are you happy? Have you achieved your personal happiness? Have you maximized your happiness? The whole point is to be happy. Even in the New Age community, they talk as if happiness is the pinnacle of life. That if we're not there, hey, you know, what's wrong? Like, what's wrong with you? And they will talk in precisely those terms.
Yeah.
The point is to recognize that if you are participating in a larger drama than simply what you can talk about over coffee with an acquaintance, right? Mm-hmm. But there's something bigger going on here. There's a bigger project involved in consciousness. Then you can start to realize that things that create unhappiness are often, while not in the moment pleasant or feeling nice, they yield fruits over time. They yield transformation. They yield change. One of the points that the Confederation makes is that the reason we suffer is because change is permanent. We are always changing. That is the nature of this world that we've incarnated into. So it's natural that we're going to suffer because it's almost, we're often not going to be able to roll with the changes. Completely normal. And not rolling with those changes, feeling some friction when we bump up to those changes is how we receive our catalyst. Like that is what catalyst is in a lot of ways. It's our subconscious recognition of the need for change and kind of like recognizing the delta between where we want to be as souls and where we are as incarnate conscious beings, right?
Yeah. It makes me, I say that word a lot, or I say that sentence, it makes me think, if I have this idea that if you have the same opinions broadly today that you had 10 years ago, there's probably some challenges you can lean into or some reading, my thoughts, my opinions about things have changed wildly in the last 10 years. And it's like they change every 3 years because I'll get some new piece of information that I'm like, wow, that I didn't know that. And it'll completely reshape how I view a certain issue, how I feel about myself, how I feel about other people's experiences, whatever it may be. And take that to the extreme. Well, let's pretend I wasn't growing. Let's pretend that my opinions today were the exact same as they were 10 years ago. Take this to the extreme that we are infinite beings that live, forever, literally forever. And think of what if your spirit didn't change for 1,000,000 years? If you were just the same spirit, or 1,000,000,000 years, boy, that would be something. Maybe that's cool, but it seems like if we're taking the idea of spiritual growth and taking our current incarnation as that in a microcosm, then it's natural that there are lessons to learn, that there are experiences we need to hammer through and slowly develop. So anyway, I think I just use my personal experience of having my opinions change over time, just as a little, maybe it's a reminder that I personally am growing. Whenever I think I'm right about something, now I always take it with a huge grain of salt because I know in 5 years, I'm going to feel differently. I'm going to feel very differently.
And the happiness that comes from being right, well, is very fleeting too, right? It's even more fleeting than suffering, right?
And on top of that, when I hear someone else talking like they are 100% right, I need to show love and compassion because I start to think, they're full of shit. So,
yeah.
But
the issue is that, this constant change of our density moves the goalposts by which we measure whether we're on the path, whether we're happy in the first place.
Yeah. Great point.
There's a quote about the interplay between change and suffering that I'd love to introduce if it would be a good time.
Oh, that's
perfect. I always feel like you're able to riff off of these excerpts better than I can, but I'm going to do my best to follow your example.
I mean, that sounds right in line with what we're talking about. So let's hear it.
Sweet. January 10th, 1991. This is Quo. Now, as you are aware, the process of spiritual growth involves much change, and this takes place on many different levels. Change is at times most welcome, and it may not be perceived at those times that there is any suffering taking place. However, each choice that is made involves, of necessity, a sacrifice of all other choices at the moment, and suffering may be felt on many levels. It is possible to follow the paths outlined by the more traditional viewpoints that adamantly hold to the view that suffering is essential for purification, for growth. It is possible to adopt this viewpoint in whole or in part, to use suffering in the life intentionally to accelerate one's process of spiritual evolution. As you are aware, the conscious use of catalysts in this way is the means whereby one's growth is accelerated. The conscious use of catalyst.
Maybe recognizing what catalyst you're experiencing. Recognize the suffering for what it is, because therein lies the path to growth.
Yes.
Yeah.
A lot of the way that we experience change metaphysically, I believe, is as a subconscious signal of a place we want to get to. And that is what causes kind of the ferment that impels us to push through what otherwise, the inertia that we might otherwise, that might otherwise keep us where we're at, right? Like we have a desire to reach towards the light, as all things in the creation do. The upward spiraling light, we're reaching towards the light. And so what we're doing is we're giving ourselves subconsciously work to do. And then our conscious mind does that in this very particular way that helps us ground our experiences, learn and grow from them. I'll continue the excerpt. You are aware that there is much catalyst among your peoples that is unused. Indeed, much that is little even noticed. This is to be expected, as the nature of your illusion is most heavy, and you are constantly bombarded with more than your senses are able to focus on. Thus, the role of suffering in each seeker's life may in actuality be chosen by the seeker. It may be catalyst on which the attention is focused, and therefrom much understanding and much growth may take place. It may be ignored or avoided as much as possible. But we would suggest to you that, as a seeker, this would not be the most desirable course of action if progress on the path is what is desired. And so our ability to make a free will choice about how we are going to experience this catalyst is part of how it's kind of like our throttle and our brake on our spiritual evolution. It's our ability to have a say in how much or how little change we actually experience, because it is disconcerting sometimes. It is painful sometimes.
Yeah. Yeah. You know, every now and then you run into someone that seems to run into the same issues over and over and over again. It's from an outsider's perspective, you'd say it's the same catalyst. They keep running into just unfulfilling relationships, or they keep getting fired, or they keep quitting, or they work for a year and then they quit and they move on to a different job, something. And that, personally speaking, I have a big issue with focus on one thing for an extended period of time. I'm the kind of guy that I fall into rabbit holes very quickly, and I love learning and experiencing new things, new ideas. And I feel like this is a theme that perhaps I've chosen for myself pre-incarnation, because this leads to suffering. I remember when I had left being a music teacher and I was a music performer and I was trying to figure out what I was going to do with my life. By the time that I had discovered that I wanted to move forward in the financial and investment world, my resume was a complete mess. And I remember doing an interview with a guy. He read my cover letter. I only got an interview because I had a good cover letter. And he's like, I got to be honest, Ryan, how do I know in the next year or two you don't want to be an astronaut or something? How do I know that I can invest the time and effort into you? I said, I can see how you see that because of, I totally understand. All I can ask is that you give me a chance. But this is a recurring theme in my life, and it does lead to suffering. And this is a lesson I need to learn. I need to lean into. And my hope is that if I can figure this out, that I get to move on to a new lesson. Perhaps this challenge will kind of subside and I can try to figure something out. But that comes to mind.
There's always a pattern. There tends to be a pattern to our catalyst. Now, I hesitate to point that out because it sounds like a clue for the intellect to be able to bite into catalyst, and that might be taking it too far. But there often is a pattern because we usually, according to the Confederation, choose one or a very small handful of lessons to learn.
Mm-hmm.
And so we are going to see phenomenal reality, our lives, reflecting back to us over and over again, clues about, what it is that we're actually working on that's buried in all of these, actual situations, right? So like these actual job situations or relationship situations, whatever, have all this detail in them. They're all like, they have all these things going on, all this rich drama that, and you can like explain for hours about like all the nuances. But at the end of the day, the underlying emotional charge of it is usually the thing that you're actually grappling with. And the details are just kind of the way that it manifests in reality this time, right?
This time. Yes. This time, this happened. This time, it's like, no, dude, it's a pattern.
Yeah.
I used to work with a guy, and we're still friends, but he left the company I'm currently with, that I've been with for 7 or 8 years now. He left the company a couple years after I started. He had been there 3 years, and I think with his previous job, he was there 3 years. And I think with his previous job, he was there 3 years. He was on this like 3-year rotation, and always thinking that it was the work he was at, it was the job he was at that was the issue. And from outsiders, we could see that, no, my friend, it's actually not where you're at. It's what you are feeling. There's something in you that's getting the itch that you need to try something else, or there's some hole that you're trying to fill. Whatever, we're intellectualizing this, but we could see from outsiders that nothing had really changed in his job necessarily, but he was starting to react differently to this and that. But from his perspective, it was an external force that was affecting him. Not realizing, I think, as a lot of people fail to realize, that so much, everything we experience is internal. Everything we experience is constructed by our brain, by our soul, whatever you want to call it. Everything that we experience is constructed by us. Everything that has meaning is meaning we give to it. The meaning is just not there. It's something that we create. So, yeah, just another example of a recurring theme that I think now the job that he's been there for. So he's broken the 3-year record, but it's always easy from the outside, and I said quote unquote easy. It's always easy to look at someone else and go, oh, they just need to do this, or oh, this is going on in their lives, but fail to turn the mirror around and look at yourself, or not judge the other person. I think this is really what's on my mind, is just the level of judgment that we as humans spread far and wide, maybe in some effort to feel like we've got our game together. Oh, well, I have my game together because I know exactly what's going wrong with that person and that person and that person, instead of maybe eating a slice of humble pie. And in humility and openness, going, we all have our issues, and not one of us is better than another or worse than another. We're all on that same spiritual path, trying to learn.
Amen.
Amen. Hatonn there's a session in May 25th, 1980. Carla is channeling Hatonn, and as Hatonn often does, Hatonn tells us a story. And I love these stories. I do love these stories, but this one pertains to suffering really being in our minds. Hatonn states, there was once a young man who desired freedom, for he was a young man of great sensitivity. And when he saw the poverty, the hunger, the suffering in the world about him, he could not understand how these people could be bound to their suffering. This young man spent years working actively to alleviate suffering and promote personal freedom for his brothers and sisters, wherever he found the need. But ultimately, He was betrayed by his own bitterness, for he knew that no matter what he did, it would never be enough to alleviate prison, which hunger and poverty had caused for so many upon your sphere. And so, he set all his daily work aside and went upon a journey to seek an understanding of the reason why men must be bound by suffering and why they could not be free. He asked many people and received many answers, for there are those who believe many different things upon your planetary sphere, my friends. And each of those believes that they are the percipients of the truth. Small note here, if you don't know what percipience is, it means that you're the one who has it. You're the one who expresses the truth. Hatonn continues, some believe there is no such thing as freedom. Others believe that some must pay a price and are bound by their own previous errors. But with none of these answers was he satisfied. One day he stopped upon an isle, for his ship needed supplies, and he was free to roam about this small tropical place, and he saw poverty again and conditions which were not conducive to health. And he found a native upon the island who spoke his language, and he told this native of his great dilemma. The native was a large man, and his laugh was equally loud, and his laughter rang through the small hall in which they sat, and the native man tapped his forehead. Freedom, he said. Here is freedom, nowhere else. And the young man cried, but what about all those who are starving or ill or poor? The big man reached out and tapped the seeker upon the forehead. Their freedom is in your head, he said. You must let them go. Then their freedom will be in their heads. I like this story at the end here, particularly, in that those, again, it kind of comes back to judgment and perceptions. That one's freedom, one's suffering is in your own head. And I can project my own suffering into the minds of others. And I think this goes back to a point that you brought up, Jeremy, where two people might be experiencing the same thing. And one can look at the other and ask, what? How are they excelling? How are they happy? Because I'm in the same position and I'm doing terribly. You could be projecting. You could just assume that everyone else who's in your position is miserable. It's a good story that it just reminds us that it's all internal, it's all personal.
Well, so I love that story too. And, as you know, I have, I really clue in when the Confederation talks about, ways of thinking and ways of feeling in terms of freedom, right? But it's interesting because it kind of contrasts with the idea of, well, if it doesn't really contrast. Their freedom is in their heads, but that doesn't mean that we can't share their suffering, right? They may be bound by it. What I think is really being discussed there is the concept of resistance to pain, resistance to feeling trapped by the conditions of reality, of the conditions of even our own mind and attitude. And how a lot of there was a quote where pointed out that the definition of suffer is to allow. You suffer the little children to come unto me, right? And actually, I think I have that excerpt right here. Yeah. Would it work to read it right now? Because I think we're at the point of the resistance thing.
If it's about suffering, Jeremy, throw it on the pile.
Okay, I might need a second.
That's okay.
February 12th, 1995. In speaking with you about suffering, we would begin by looking at what we just said. It took us a long, long time and a great deal of careful work of the mind, work of the heart, and work of the intuition to achieve the awareness which we now enjoy. We have removed brick by brick the walls between us who are of Quo. We have removed before that brick by brick the walls within ourselves which kept us from allowing which kept us from allowing ourselves the surcease of that suffering which we so needed to experience. Suffering is a word biased substantially in the negative sense.
Hold on, Jeremy. Yep. Back up one sentence. Remove brick by brick at one level, and then remove brick by brick of themselves. Can you reread that?
We have removed brick by brick the walls between us who are of Quo, so between them.
Okay.
We have removed brick by brick the walls within ourselves, which kept us from allowing ourselves the surcease of that suffering which we so needed to experience.
Okay, hold your spot right there. So removing, it's interesting, there's two levels here of removing the barriers between each other, but removing the barriers within oneself. I think, is that right? Do you think that's what they're saying? I think that's that's just an interesting idea. It kind of goes back to that old Orange Ray. Yep. And coming to terms with openness and honesty and love of yourself. But maybe good food for thought, for me personally, and perhaps for some listeners, as far as, do you have walls? I know this is a tough subject that I really can't speak to, but the number of women I've dated who have dealt with some form of physical abuse or sexual abuse, I am only starting to learn of the reality of, I look back in my past and go, oh my gosh, this woman was abused, so, but I can, every now and then, I'll just pick up a cue in a conversation that I will recognize, okay, this woman, perhaps this coworker, perhaps this acquaintance, this woman dealt with something in her past. And it's clear that she is shutting it off, or that there's, that it's still an issue, and perhaps rightfully so. I'm not sure. I can't really speak to it, but I've ran into that, oddly enough, a couple times in the last month or two. But that
the walls are there. We built the walls to protect us.
Yes.
They aren't bad.
Yes.
They just end up being a way to kick the can down the road so that we can deal with it. We can deal with facing ourselves in that particular respect a little bit further down the road than right now. That's not necessarily unhealthy. The whole point is that Quo got to where they got to by doing this deconstructive project.
I'm just trying to shed some light on how challenging that process can be, especially when you've dealt with some real trauma in your life. And we as a society can't get to fourth density until we kind of break the walls between each other, so to speak. Well, can that really happen until we've broken down the walls within ourselves? And just think of the mountain of the task that is, given the personal trauma that so many people have dealt with. That alone, and this is why one message that is really resonating with me in our conversations, Jeremy, is just the amount of work that needs to be done on that internal level, and how can we help each other work on that personal level and build and be the best people that we can be, because I think the natural outgrowth of being a whole and complete person is that we are able to be there for others. We're able to understand others. When you've faced your own demons, when you've faced your own trauma and shadow, and you've somehow been able to integrate that into your life and still love yourself and still love others, you're going to be a fucking rock star to other people who are dealing with that. But that is the Everest of all Everests in this illusion, in our density, it would seem.
Yeah, there's something about third density where we finally have like a rational conscious mind to bring to bear, an intellect to bring to bear on these things. We spend all our time trying to intellectualize and figure out why things are good and why things are bad and make rules for ourselves and all this. But at the end of the day, that intellect is not supposed to be thrown away. The Confederation never says, you shouldn't be intellectual whatsoever. You should go solely by feeling, solely by emotion, and spontaneous emission of, just whatever comes to mind. No, it is to enlist the intellect as a junior partner, not as a senior partner.
Yeah.
Because there are things that we can see with our intellect that then can call to resources that we have in our deeper selves. That I believe, I'm speculating here, but I believe that's what's meant by that.
All right. Well, that's all I got on that. Do you want to keep going?
It's good that you highlighted this, because there's going to be the wall is a metaphor for this resistance that we feel to pain, that we feel to the things that we don't like, and that there's something about suffering that's very tied up in this resistance. So to continue. Suffering is a word biased substantially in the negative sense. When one suffers, one is considered to be bearing pain, difficulty, and trouble. Yet to suffer is actually to allow, and what is allowed in suffering is fear. Any experience may be suffered or allowed to occur, yet it is the experience which is not resisted, which brings a lack of suffering. We do not speak of the suffering of hunger and nakedness and imprisonment when we say that suffering is a choice. In those cases, also suffering is indeed a choice. But we would deal at this moment with the normal suffering day by day, which strikes at the heart of most entities' life experience. The suffering of a self which is resisting the flow of that which is occurring in front of the eyes. The suffering between people, the suffering at a job, or doing some work. The suffering because of what one does not have, the suffering because of that which one has and cannot be rid of. These are a measure of the resistance the seeker has, usually subconsciously, to the drift of that destiny which always lies before one, which one spins out as does the spider its web from the nexus within which experience is recorded. Let us look at the suffering of the rock. First, it becomes rock by being cast out of the fiery molten core which is beneath that which is rock upon your planetary sphere, flung into space, tossed away by that which was its home. It now thrusts upwards through an atmosphere of air. Nothing is as it was, and through your time, this rock is worn, slowly and steadily, eroded, pitted, roughened, and creviced, until little bits of earth cling to its surface, and gradually it is covered by earth, which then grows plants, whose roots reach down into the rock, breaking it, further wearing it away, until perhaps this rock is upheaved by another burst of molten energy. Sorry, guys. Becoming broken, falling down in splinters and shards, rolling perhaps into the bed of some stream and washing century by century until it has become 1,000,000 pebbles, 1,000,000,000 grains of sand. The rock has a long life. From its first identity as rock until its last dissolution, it is constantly worn away, broken and rebroken, that earth may come to it, that it may support growth and blooming, and that it may eventually dissolve. Because the rock has no self-consciousness, it does not suffer. It experiences. It is not the rock that it is not that the rock accepts the erosion which eventually dissolves it. It is that its nature is as it is, and that which occurs is that which occurs. For the animal, the life is that which is, for again, there is no self-consciousness except that which is implanted within it by its human caretakers. If it has the cut or the lame paw, it simply has this. It endures it without suffering. It experiences the pain, the discomfort, but it does not suffer, for it does not reflect within itself, but rather seeks the sleep which frees it to dream of days when it was chasing game and being that which it is as a young one. Isn't that beautiful?
That is good.
However, within third density lies the great gift and that great burden of self-consciousness. You also, as the rock, as the animal, from the first moment of being thrust out into the atmosphere to that last moment when breath expires, experience and suffer through every change, every new discovery, every phase and stage of development, both physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual. And insofar as the experience is not resisted and is entered into faithfully, there is not the suffering. Few there are among your people who have achieved a lack of fear sufficient to claim no suffering from fire, torture, sudden death, or a million smaller mishaps of circumstance. For the great millions, suffering is a fact. Mm-hmm. The resistance to discomfort and pain on whatever level is instinctive. The creature seeks comfort. This is an instinct. And this is...
Okay.
Yeah.
Are you about to hit
this is what I mean. This is what I was saying about suffering and wrongness, right? Pain and wrongness, right? It's instinctual. It's built into us to explain this to ourselves on a level that we didn't have to explain it to ourselves before. Our aversion to pain then becomes this whole narrative that we tell ourselves, right?
The aversion to pain. And I think this is where I'm a little weird, because if I'm not experiencing some kind of physical pain on a weekly basis, I mean, I'm not a masochist, friends, but there is something about pushing yourself physically to be just ridiculously tired. I used to run ultra marathons, and the first 50K that I ran was 31 miles, had roughly, I think, 8,000 feet of elevation climbing involved. And that's substantial for a 30-mile run. And it just so happened that it was one of the hottest days of the year. It got to be like 112 out on the trails. And it was in that experience that I realized that I needed to propose to my then girlfriend, who is my now wife, because I thought I was like, it was around mile 26 or 27. I had no water. I had a mile and a half or 2 miles to the next aid station, and I was overheating. I was legitimately overheating. And I remember looking around. I'm all by myself in the hills, and I'm thinking, this is what it must feel like when people know that they're going to die. I knew I wasn't going to die. I just had to get to the next aid station. But I had that recognition that I was overheating, and the next step, if I were to continue in that path, would be death. And it was at that point, Pauline, my girlfriend, my now wife, was already at the finish line waiting for me. It was going to be a couple hours till I got there, but she was already waiting for me. And it was at that point I knew I had to, she had waited long enough for me. I wasn't going to make her wait anymore. But that experience is a great example of what I experience in general when I try to experience that physical pain, because there's little bits of me. Well, the first message in the beginning of the episode, suffering provides the opportunity to exercise grit. And there is something about embracing suffering, at least in my experience, physical pain, and rolling with it and trying to push past it, because what you learn about yourself is so interesting. It's just,
it can put a lot of things in perspective once you're pushed up against the wall like that by circumstance.
Great point. And honestly, I feel like I've got an easy life, comparatively speaking. I live in the Pacific Northwest. I earn a good living. It's like standard we got first world problems is what we have, and not to say that those aren't real problems, but they're first world problems. They are what they are. And me going out and trying to suffer physically just reminds me that, there's another kind of pain that's out there. And it provides other learning opportunities. But I think you put it very well, Jeremy. It helps with perspective, helps put things in perspective. So, but the aversion to pain, suffering as an aversion to pain, whether it be resistance, whether it be emotional, spiritual, intellectual, physical, that makes sense to me.
Yeah, and like in the same way that like if we can not suffer alone, it makes us feel like it's less of a problem with us and more of like a human problem that we're all dealing with. To the extent that we can not resist it within ourselves, we kind of also open ourselves up to our own innate humanity, give ourselves a little bit of a break, understand that like it doesn't mean that that we went down the wrong path in life.
Yeah.
I just have one more paragraph I wanted to read from this.
Okay, perfect. Yeah.
We do encourage each seeker to gaze without fear at the troubles of the day. When resistance is felt, when the suffering occurs, this is a puzzle for later contemplation. Not to stop the flow of suffering, but rather to allow a portion of the self to observe it, so that it may be accurately remembered. When there is a distinct lack of suffering, it is well also to take note of that which constitutes the enjoyment experienced. For there is much to learn about the self from the simple reactions or responses which the self has to various stimuli. The path to self-knowledge is one in which reflection and contemplation upon one's own inner workings does bear a substantial part. And that's it. But this is the way that perhaps, there's all sorts of ways that we can use the intellect's narrative capabilities to justify and write ourselves a story that makes us right and others wrong, or makes us wrong for some particular reason. But what the Confederation suggests here is that use the intellect later. Don't do it in the moment. You're not going to figure it out. You're not going to big brain it in the moment, right? You need to feel that suffering deeply, or feel that enjoyment deeply, right? And then what I hear is use the intellect to help take this into the balancing exercises. Ideally, if you just need to contemplate it, that's fine. And that's admirable and better than nothing. But ultimately, if you're suffering, you need to be able to see both sides of it. You need to see it as a full spectrum experience, and not just I'm stuck in this uniquely bad aspect of my life. No, you're stuck in an aspect of your life that has all sorts of dimensions to it that you have within you.
There's so much to sort through there, and things that are just dumping into my mind.
Yeah.
But I like the idea. Don't use your brain in the moment. Wait, maybe enjoy those emotions, those purified emotions that we just talked about a couple episodes ago.
Well, feel them. They might not be purified in the moment, right? They might be all tangled up.
Right. You're right. That I'm using my words wrong. You're right. But then take that experience into the balancing exercise. Take it into meditation. Take it into meditation when you're trying to calm down that chatter that's going on in your mind, and you're trying to find that deeper level inside of yourself. That is not, that is still not an exercise I have done to any great extent in meditation.
It's a little, it can feel a little arcane when you first start getting into it. It doesn't really fit with how you're used to dealing with your own experiences and emotions. I think you just have to use kind of your own judgment on when a particular technique is appropriate and when it isn't. And also, you just need to experiment. You need to throw everything at the wall and see what sticks, what works for you. Sometimes, what you don't want to do is have something gnaw at you for a long period of time, because that gnawing is kind of the, you just recapitulating the resistance. Mm-hmm. What you want is to have some way where you can finally let that guard down. It should be, it would be nice if it were in a controlled environment where you had the time to do it. You had your full self to give to it. But even if you just need to meditate and calm down after the fact, and then puzzle about it. As long as you're giving yourself a way to see a broader view and to stop clinging to this one thing that justifies the situation, that narrates it and puts it in a nice package that you can explain away to yourself, right? Instead, focus on what you can do to broaden the experience and make it a bigger, more nuanced thing. That's how eventually we find the treasures in there that we've that our subconsciouses have planted in our perception of these things, right?
Mm-hmm. I'm almost spent out of ideas here. Do you have any more? Yeah. Do you have any more interesting paragraphs or any other transcripts that you got nearby?
Yeah, there's an 88 quo that I think follows right from this.
Early 88 quo.
Yeah, because 86 is the first quo, so this is pretty early. April 3rd, 88. There is much of what is called truth, which is indeed not truth, but a multiplicity of ever-shifting truths, which function in what you may call a social way, in order to slide one through the incarnation with the least possible friction. There is another truth, an absolute and unchanging truth, a mysterious, puzzling, ever-calling truth, which any within your illusion cannot see, but only know through the experience of love. Love is the one great original thought. It cannot be bought, it cannot be manipulated, and it cannot be killed. It may become obvious that we are not speaking of romantic love, which is prey to all these difficulties. We are not speaking of the love of friendship or any other definition of love which may be put into words. Indeed, could we find a unique word which would express the beautiful, terrible love which created all that there is, we would use it. Yet this concept lies so far within the area of the deep mind. Its reality can only be reached through the non-words which may be called faith. This love is single, and within it are all things, all entities, thoughts, artifacts, seeming objects, and each and every energy within the infinity of the creation. Each of you is love. This is your reality, your absoluteness, your unchangeable nature, your truth. Suffering lies not upon this level, but upon the level, for the most part, of half-seen truths that are relative to the situations and conditions of your society and culture. We realize that there are those who experience suffering in physical ways, pain, hunger, sickness, and death, that process which is so feared among your peoples. By far, however, the greatest amount of suffering among your peoples is due to the ingestion and acceptance of cultural and social truths, and in this we include theology of all kinds, as standards against which to measure the self.
To give another personal story, I've still got in my mind that I want to explore some churches in the area and possibly, if one feels like a right fit, find a church, which for me is a big deal because I've been anti-church for quite a while, because when I was growing up, the only Christians that I knew weren't necessarily they weren't nice people. Let's just put it that way. On the surface, they were nice, but they were extremely judgmental, extremely in a bad way, very condescending, so it really left a bad taste in my mouth. Mm-hmm. But now, after meeting more than a few Christians that are not necessarily preaching what they believe, but living by example what they believe, it's kind of replanted that seed in my idea. And I'll bring it up with my wife, and it's clear that I think my wife is where I was at 5 or 6 years ago, maybe 10 years ago, and she's like, hell no, there's no way I'm going to church. And it's something I would want to do as a family, I don't want to drag her out there, but it's clear that, she has her own perceptions of what that is, what religion is. And I digress a little bit. What's in culture, what's accepted in our culture, what's accepted in our churches, what's accepted here and there, often, for me, conflicts with the way that I feel things should be. Mm-hmm. What is it? The normative versus the prescriptive, mm-hmm. version of reality. I want things to be X, yet they are Y. And that space in between is the suffering. If I don't accept it, if I don't recognize what it is for what it is, and if I combat that discrepancy, then suffering sets in. It's almost like in order for me to get from X to Y, or for me to help my vision of society to get to Y, well, I need to live by example my version of reality, my version of what I would want culture to be, my version of what I would want spirituality or religion to be. And hopefully through my example, it's not going to happen in one lifetime, but maybe through my example, I can start a waterfall, plant the seed that will grow into a tree that will produce fruit, which will fall and plant more seeds. And maybe after 5 or 10 generations, we'll be closer to my vision of why. Now, I know that's kind of a selfish view of things, but I think you reading that paragraph that that suffering kind of comes in based on how we're experiencing culture and society and theology, and yeah, oftentimes we just come up into conflict with those day-to-day experiences.
It's all these stories that we're trying to balance in our head to frame what we experience. How should we process and take value out of our experiences? Well, the narratives give us a culturally accepted way to do that, so that not when we have these experiences and we judge and put them in their boxes for later use, we can explain that to people, right? They can relate to our experiences on that. And I think what you are talking about is how can I be a creative agent in the way that only I can, what I can only me can offer to the world. And the way to do that is to take control of what you have control of and to release control of things that you ultimately don't have control of. And the only thing you really have control over is yourself. And even then, fleetingly, right?
Yeah. Yeah, totally.
Sometimes we experience the self in third density as something happening to us. I think that's what it means when we say that we have woken up. A lot of times I think what we mean is feeling less like that, feeling less like the self is happening to us.
Well,
the self is a prescribed thing that's set in stone, and then we just either enjoy it or suffer it, right?
Well, the veil separates us from each other, but it also separates us from ourselves. And I love the way Eckhart Tolle put this when he had his spiritual revelation in his late 20s. He was, if you don't know who that guy is, I'll put a plug to one of his best-selling books. But he was, if you don't know his story, he was somewhat suicidal in his late 20s. He was just extremely depressed. And one night he was thinking to himself, I cannot live with myself. I can't live with myself anymore. And then a little thought came into his head. Wait a minute. I cannot live with myself. Who is this I, and why does it feel like this myself is different? What's going on there? And from that point, he kind of fell into this spiritual experience that completely turned him around. The next day, I guess he walked around in just bliss, and now he's call him a spiritual teacher. But that message of his experience has really stuck with me. Who is this I? And who is this myself that I cannot live with? And why are they different? And I think boiling it all down to trying to get it just a clear idea, we are somewhat separated from ourselves in this density.
We have those bricks.
We got those bricks we got to tear down, and it's so hard. And quite often, just quickly going back to the suffering with regards to culture and society, quite often, I would say in my personal experience, that suffering stems from, or at least it used to stem from, trying to act or think or be in a way that I thought others wanted, that I thought others would find acceptable, rather than just being true to myself and accepting it, and then later realizing that most people that I came into contact with didn't want me to be my perception of what I thought they wanted me to be. They just wanted me to be me and be happy being me. And, don't be a dick being me, but, be a good person, but be who I am. And I think if I were to be a cultural critique, what is quote unquote wrong with society is that so many people are caught up in fulfilling the perceptions and expectations, or the perceptions and conceptions of other people. not realizing that maybe they don't actually want you to, that there might be a mismatch there.
Yeah, like people don't want us to have walls in ourselves either, right?
Yeah.
Like other people don't want that for us.
You can feel it. You can feel it when you're talking with someone. And I remember being single in California, and you go out to a bar with your buddies, and you're just talking with people, and you get a sense very quickly, both men and women chatting with people, like who is being real, who is being themselves, and who is not. And my sister tells an interesting story. My sister is in the inland Northwest, and she went with some girlfriends down to the LA Hollywood area, and they were out at a bar or a club where I don't know where she was at, but she said that she stood out like a sore thumb. A lot of guys came up to her and were like, "You're not from here." Something about her, and she's like this. She's just herself. She's an absolute sweetheart. And multiple guys came up to her like, "Where are you from? You're not from here." Because the realness was just visible. It was palpable, and there's something so refreshing when you're talking with someone and you're talking with someone, or you're with someone who is themselves, and you're connecting with that person and not some facade of that person that you got to try to break through. And, there's something so refreshing just about you being open. And I kind of think that it does start with you, but talking with someone who's open and who's themselves and who's secure in themselves, it's almost like it gives you permission to be yourself as well. But
sorry, I can only think about like, you're not from around here is probably also like kind of a good pickup line, right?
Probably.
Like even if you look like you are from here, like go ahead and say it, But I get what you're saying. This was proven by multiple instances.
Yeah. So yeah. So it's just
I just never used that line.
Yeah. I didn't either. I was terrible at picking up. So, and I'm glad I don't have to I'm glad I don't have to ever try to do that again. So
there's a wall that hasn't come down yet for me.
But where were we at? Being separate from ourselves. Mm-hmm. And going back to it, it's work to break down those barriers within oneself, and to be real and true to yourself, and to be secure, and to embrace all the things you've experienced and all the things you're going to experience. All of this suffering. It's a challenge. But dang, if you can do it, there's so much reward. If not from the relationships you build with others, but the peace that comes with that acceptance of oneself.
Yeah, we're all here already, whether we like it or not at the moment. So we either dive into it, or we try to back away. Mm-hmm. And either choice is valid. And there's definitely times when all of us back away slowly from what's going on and just don't want to experience it. And that gives us information about ourselves too. Those walls give us information about ourselves because their provenance, why we built them, tells us something about what we needed more time to process.
Mm-hmm. Great point.
So, yeah.
Great point. Well,
did we put in our time? I feel like we haven't exhausted the topic, but we can't keep going. Like
I don't think we'll ever exhaust any of these topics. There's but
I think the next step to take in looking at this is to get deeper into the relationship between something like suffering, which is a kind of specific catalyst or experience that happens in our lives, and then to connect that to the broader concept of catalyst, right? So how can we start to use experiences like suffering, experiences like joy, experiences like confusion, and see in all of those experiences the nature of catalyst and the way that it works with us to drive our evolution forward. I reserve the right to think of a better topic later. But
No, that's a good point. Think of what do you struggle with? What causes you suffering? Legitimate suffering, not the choice suffering of going out and running 50 miles, but what, the emotional turmoil. What is that? Can you lean into that a little bit? Can you ask the 5 whys and get down to a more principle base core level of what's going on internally? And can you start to chip away at that wall, chip away at those blocks, and try to slowly break it down?
Yes. Yeah. I thought you were going off in a different direction, but you got exactly where I was trying to go. To understand Catalyst as this friend, right?
As a friend. Oh, what a good mind shift. What a good, 10 points for Jeremy. That's it.
I haven't given you any points. I feel awful.
It's probably because points don't mean anything.
I'm keeping it real over here.
I love that though. Think of Catalyst as a friend. Why does it have to be combative? I'm gonna have to stew on that. That's really good though.
Well, if Catalyst is a friend, then who is the us that's being the friend to it, right? It puts our footing in a different place. It gives us a different perspective on what our role is in our lives. Is our role to select the details of our lives for comfort, security, happiness, the things that we think will fulfill us? Or is it to pay attention and to roll with things and try to get the most that we can out of whatever happens to us?
Mm-hmm.
You know where I come down, but I would be lying if I said I didn't select for comfort,
It's a battle.
It's okay.
It's a battle for me. Yeah.
Why is it a battle?
Well, because it's like, I used to be the kind of guy that always took the easy way out. And then I discovered what happens when you really challenge yourself and you push past what you thought were your barriers, you push past what you think you're capable of, and you discover, oh my gosh, there's a whole new world out here that I've got to explore. Once I discovered that my boundaries were self-created and that I could actually choose to push past those, that I stopped taking the easy way out all the time, because there was so much growth available in the challenge. And so I started seeking out challenge. And since then, it's been kind of like my personality of, I don't have a dimmer switch. I'm either on or off. So if I'm lounging, I'm lounging hard. Yeah. But if I'm working, I'm working hard. And I go back and forth. I feel like I need to find a better balance between the two, but it's what I struggle with, either.
Gotcha.
Yeah. Full steam ahead, or I'm going to stop. So taking it easy.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. So,
sounds like you know what you're doing.
Yeah. Well, at least I'll pretend like I do. Well, shoot.
Well,
another good subject. I'm sure this will come up again. And I'm sure this will come up again, because again, I think there's some core themes to this message, or there's just some core themes to this experience. And I think you can boil it down to a few key ideas. I think suffering and the lessons that accompany suffering is one of them. Mm-hmm. I think that you can keep digging into this and keep giving anecdotes here and there that help illuminate different aspects to what this all means. So,
and if we had more time, I would have really liked to have explored Confederation entities, independent understandings and digestions of suffering, because I think they have some interesting viewpoints. Maybe we'll be able to get to that some other time.
Yeah, we'll put it on the docket. Put it on the list. Well, my friend, on that note, shall we wrap up?
We've really enjoyed this. Stay in the love and light, friends.